Hey everyone, how are you doing today? Thanks for coming and listening after lunch on your own and showing up to listen to Damien and I talk a little bit about the state of network automation. My name's Jonah Cowell. I currently work for Kentic. I'm the CTO, but I have pretty wide experience as a practitioner running infrastructure and operations, running networks. I kind of shifted gears and went into research for a few years at Gartner and then moved back working for a couple of vendors, AppDynamics and Cisco, and currently at Kentic. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the state of automation. I'm going to use a little bit of the data that Damien talked about, but also sort of set some guidelines and explain where I think things are going and some of the things that we're seeing. I've spoken to a lot of folks trying to transform their infrastructures, transform their tooling. And most people really struggle with the same problems, which is really the people and how they can deal with the debt that they have as they try to transform and build new things. I obviously work for a monitoring company. I'm not going to talk much about monitoring. This is really more about the automation side. But we do see things coming together, so I'll talk a little bit about what Damien touched on, which is that event-driven automation and where we see things going, especially in some of our most advanced customers. So just going to touch on a few key things around what's happening with the network and the complexity. And then talk about the evolution of some of the automation tools that we've seen, because there's been a lot of changes as the infrastructures have evolved, so have the tools. And then also talk about sort of state of the union, some of the survey results, and sort of some of the more advanced things around integration into continuous integration systems and eventually continuous delivery, and sort of where that's evolving to. Some of our customers at Kentic are definitely on that cutting edge, but the bulk are trying to figure out how they deal with their current situation and sort of move on. Some interesting information about what's happening. It's obviously good for the audience here in terms of folks that run networks or that run co-location and other facilities. Enterprises are really trying to get out of running their own data centers. They either want to go into an environment where someone is running it for them or there's additional flexibility. And the graph over on the right-hand side really shows both historical and future spending on cloud services. The top graph, obviously it's hard to see this, but the top graph is software as a service. The other two lines that are trending up are infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. So those of you that are doing co-location and building these services are going to see continued investment. But what this really means is that the network becomes even more important, because as environments are distributed and more SaaS services are being consumed, the network becomes that critical point that ties everything together, which is good news for us as an industry, because the problems are just going to get more complex and the demand on our services and what we build is going to increase. But the complexity is also increasing significantly. We heard a lot in the keynotes this week about interesting ways that SD-WAN and virtualization of networks is changing. This is also happening significantly on the enterprise. We see almost every telco that we work with and most enterprises investing in some type of SD-WAN. And they do this in order to get that flexibility, but it creates a lot of challenges for us as networking professionals, because it's hard to diagnose and debug these things that abstract a lot of what we're used to dealing with. Additionally, if you have to integrate with these solutions, they all have different APIs, different formats for telemetry. There's so much variance in here that it's really hard to manage them. It's hard to automate them, it's hard to troubleshoot them. And this is just going to continue getting more complex as we layer more on top of the onion, so to speak. And so what we've seen over time, and I'm surprised that Damien said he was not expecting people to have more automation systems over the last 3 years, but I definitely see people adopting more automation systems to deal with these new layers. If you sort of rewind to what we were doing 10 to 15 years ago, these NCCM type tools would connect and manage traditional network environments in terms of being able to scale out a software upgrade or deploy an ACL across a large distributed network. They would do some of these big bulk changes and allow you to understand the networks. I manage several of these tools across pretty large networks, 30,000 network devices. And they did a pretty good job, but they really lacked running things in a code forward method. So as people have moved towards DevOps and looking at infrastructure as code, these network orchestration type systems, Ansible obviously being the most common one, is really where people have moved around their tooling. But what we start seeing is that when you look at NSX and ACI and some of these new policy-based systems, that really abstracts away a lot of the network constructs and lets us control application layers. And of course, these same vendors are talking about this intent-based system that they're expecting to build at some point in the future that's really fantasy at this point, but sounds great in marketing. We'll see where that whole thing goes, but it's clearly getting a lot of buzz, but not a lot of reality yet. So that is where things are going around automation. We'll see how much of this is smoke and mirrors and how much of it is real. But the transition towards that code-based infrastructure management is definitely happening. And Damien obviously used much cleaner data from the survey. I sort of used the raw data here. And he talked about the survey, so I'm not going to go into the details behind it, but Ansible is clearly the tool that we see across our customers, and just from speaking to folks in terms of where they're going. But the challenge is that Ansible isn't in itself an out-of-the-box, easy-to-use system. You have to write a lot of code. So this means that you really need different types of engineers, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The other thing that Damien also touched on is how broken monitoring is. If you had told me 10 years ago that we would still be doing ping and up-down monitoring as our primary method of understanding the network, I would have called you crazy. Because I was doing packet capture and flow analytics 10, 15 years ago, and people today still aren't doing these things, which I find depressing, disheartening, I don't know what you want to call it, but hopefully this will change because monitoring has some serious challenges. But this move to infrastructure as code and managing the code is definitely is real. It's happening. It's already happened on most of the infrastructure, but the network is coming along too. The challenge here is really that many of these tools are really toolkits, and some of the tools that are out there, like Nornir, for example, aren't inherently built to just manage the network. They're really built to manage everything. So although Napalm is a network-specific toolkit and is extremely popular with users of Ansible to provide additional capabilities on top, some of these other tools are really very rudimentary toolkits. Some of them have a lot of vendor restrictions to them. Napalm only supports a few of the leading manufacturers of network devices. NetNico actually supports a lot more devices, but there are some that are in sort of like a level of support as well. And as Damien also hinted on, there's not a standard implementation here. So every time a new engineer comes in and sets one of these systems up, it's going to be different than every other company. So it's really difficult to figure out best practices, which is why it's important to participate in communities and understand what other people are doing so that you can try to find the best thing to fit your environment. And then finally, the challenge with the infrastructure as code things is that it doesn't support existing automation or existing configuration. So for many organizations that are setting up a new network, they'll start from scratch with something like Ansible, which is a great situation to be in. Unfortunately, most of us have existing infrastructure to manage. So it's very difficult to make that transition, just because you have to deal with what is in place today as you build for the future. So definitely a challenge. The other thing is modeling the network and understanding current configuration is a big challenge. So although NetConf, which has been extensively covered here over the last 4 or 5 years, and I won't go into it, it is a good attempt at standardization. It still has its own set of challenges, which means that for someone like Kentic, where we're really trying to understand the infrastructure, we can't just rely on NetConf. We actually have to do things like SNMP. We have to use other methods to discover and understand what the devices are. So although there are standards here, they're not implemented in standard ways, so it becomes very difficult as you have a complex network. If you're lucky to have standardized your entire network on a single vendor or a single platform of a single vendor, then that's great. But we don't see that as something that commonly happens, just because we build over time and you get this, change that's happening. Another topic which I am actually currently writing a blog about is streaming telemetry and how variant it is across the vendors and the platforms. So many of you would love to get rid of SNMP. I don't particularly think SNMP is a wonderful protocol. It's definitely very old, but the transition to streaming telemetry is a big challenge because it's missing a lot of the standards-based things that we built with SNMP. And so there's a lot of challenges around what you can use streaming telemetry for and what you still need SNMP for. So this is still evolving, and I wish we had some standards behind streaming telemetry like we did with SNMP. Some RFCs would definitely be nice to have there. So I was actually gonna show some demos, but I found out on Sunday that I couldn't do a live demo on stage because there's no place to plug laptops in, so I recorded a couple short videos to show a few things. But before I jump into that, I'm gonna be showing a little bit about some of the things that Damien mentioned around chat ops, because I do believe that is important. A lot of these cutting edge customers that use Kentic today also build their own chatbots and have integrated with lots of other systems. A really common one that we see is Netbox, very popular. I'm sure many of you are using it. It is a great system, but it requires some manual work to get it populated and keep it up to date. It's pretty nice because it really can show you how your network is set up, what types of devices you have, how things are connected. And it's a great single source of truth, but it does require some work to get up and running and make it useful. So I'm going to show you a little bit about chat ops and where we think things are going. The idea is really, most of us use a Slack or a Microsoft Teams or maybe some of the open source projects out there to chat among ourselves. But these tools essentially allow you to interact with a bot in a chat room and collaborate more easily, especially when you're troubleshooting problems. You can bring this data in directly to a conversation. It really creates a much more collaborative environment. So we're working with Network to Code to open source a chatbot that has a bunch of integrations out of the box. I'm going to show you a little bit of this. You can see more details if you grab these slides and look at that URL. There's a more extensive demo. But the idea is, how can we bring together some of these common tools that folks are using as they try to change their operations as well. So a quick little demo of a chatbot interacting with Netbox. So I'm going to show you here in the video that this is a copy of Netbox, and I can basically click on my sites here. I can pull up a site like Los Angeles. I can look at the devices that are on the site, some configuration information, Now I'm switching over to Slack, and I can actually make a command right here to Netbox the same type of way. Tell it that I'm interested in looking at a particular site, pick the same Los Angeles site, click submit, and instantly I get the same type of data, but it's a much faster way to interact than using that silly mouse thing, you know. So it just kind of gives you an easier way to collaborate and communicate and work together as a team on troubleshooting problems or understanding what's happening in your environment. So that's kind of one example. In this next example, I'm going to do a similar thing and show you in Kentic, you know, something that we can pull up here, sort of show me my top net flow sources in terms of the devices that we're seeing sending flow data in. I can easily pick a, you know, saved view within Kentic right from the chatbot. It then pulls up the graph that I want to look at. I can see what devices are sending it most. I can do the same exact thing in Kentic, search for a saved view. The same type of data essentially comes up, the same exact graph and view, and I can see, you know, what's sending the data and start slicing and dicing from there. But it just kind of makes it easier for you to see that data instantly in a collaborative team view versus everyone working in their own tools and their own browsers and such. So that's kind of the idea between what we're trying to build with the chatbot and really why we see this as being a future path that a lot of teams are moving towards for running automation and collaborating and troubleshooting together. And Damien also talked a little bit about some of the tools that folks are using. Most people will start with a CI type system. So naturally, the first steps that you do is take your configurations and store them in Git, some type of source control system. And then most people will start building a pipeline. Let's say I want to automate some of the verification, some of the checking that happens when a new configuration is committed. People will start stringing together these different tools, typically in Python, and they'll run that with a system, the most common being Jenkins is an open source CI system, but GitLab has a really nice CI system as well, and Git is also integrated with it. GitLab is a SaaS service, but it's open source, so you can download it and install the whole system on-prem if you want to as well. There was also a talk yesterday about Batfish, and that's definitely something that we commonly see for validating some of your policies as this gets checked in. The idea is to try to eliminate some of the errors, automate some of the checks and verification and other things that you would want to do. And then, of course, as you get more advanced, some folks will do instant deployment of that. It runs through all their verifications. They see that it checks out, and then they'll actually do the deployment directly with Ansible. It's pretty hard to retrofit an existing network to do this type of thing, but as you evolve, you can start automating more of this pipeline and be more confident in these incremental changes. And so that's the goal, is instead of doing a big Thursday night change window push of everything that you're doing, is incrementally releasing these things and being able to better manage and roll back when you have problems. And so it is important as you build these types of pipelines and the verification that you do that closed loop type system. So incorporating monitoring or running a synthetic test. Let's say you close a firewall or you close a port on an ACL or something like that. You would run a test and make sure that that was in fact closed and that the connection didn't go through. So people will often incorporate that type of testing. It's almost like unit testing with the code that they commit. And it is really common as you go into continuous deployment that your deploys fail. That is totally normal. And there's nothing wrong with it. Don't think of it as a failed release or a failed build. It's really just part of doing these incremental changes is that things do fail. The screenshot on the bottom is actually a pretty advanced CD system called Harness, and managing that failure is definitely part of any CD strategy, is understanding we've failed, how do we revert things back quickly and make sure things are back in the state they were before the change. So it is an important part of understanding continuous deployment, is that failure is expected and it is normal. It's how you recover. So a couple of things that are happening more broadly in the industry. There's a new term and a new market that's been forming over the last few years called AI Ops, something that we've been part of at Kentic for sure. But the idea here, and this is a Gartner terminology in terms of what they're seeing happening in the industry. We see a lot of folks building this with open source or using commercial technologies, but the idea is, how do I bring all of this data, the configuration, the logs, the metrics, the traffic, and store this in a central system? And the idea is, of course, first monitoring and understanding what's happening, but being able to drive service management, ticketing, paging. And then obviously the ultimate goal is to tie into that automation and make this a closed loop system. So there's a lot of things that you can accomplish with a system like this, but it's a new type of technology and the market is still really evolving. So it's very immature and fragmented and not well understood. But the goal is really, how do we do this closed loop type of thing that we've been talking about here. So you can kind of think of this as like an evolution of phases where you start off by monitoring and ultimately you want to get all the way to that goal of automation. And there's a lot of steps and things that you can use these types of systems to improve within your organization that are in between those two sort of methods. So this is kind of where these platforms are evolving to, and I'm sure we'll see lots of great open source also facilitating some of this. But it's an exciting area because it's really how we start taking this data and tying it to automation and making that easier for everyone, which I think is a very valid goal. And really it's supposed to help us identify these problems and what's happening sooner, prioritize what's the most important, and then get more out of our people by better automation and closing the loop with these things. So that's kind of an overview of what we're seeing, but it's not fully reality. It's still formulating and coming together, and I think we'll see that get much better. So with that, I'm open to take a few questions. And thanks everyone for listening.